A gift of desperation. The vast Zorthar Empire had once been feared across the galaxy. Their warriors were strong, their technology unmatched, and their fleets unchallenged. But now, their strength was fading. Their enemies sensed weakness, and the empire stood on the edge of collapse. The reason? Princess Alara. She was the only child of King Tyros, ruler of the Zorthar Empire. But unlike the mighty warriors of her people, Alara was born weak. Her body was frail, her reflexes slow, and her mind too gentle for war. The Zorthar people believed strength was everything. And for them, she was an embarrassment. King Tyros had hidden her for years, hoping she would grow stronger. But she didn't. She remained fragile, unworthy of the throne. Now, enemies gathered at the empire's borders, waiting for a chance to strike. The empire needed a strong leader, and Alara could never be that. So the king made a decision, a desperate one. He would give his daughter to the humans. The trade. In the grand hall of the Zorthar Palace, General Varkos, the king's most trusted warrior, stood beside Alara. She was dressed in a royal cloak, her silver eyes filled with confusion and fear. The towering figure of Captain Marcus Drake, a human warrior, stood before them. The humans were different from any other species. They were unpredictable, wild, and known for their ability to survive against impossible odds. Some feared them, others respected them. King Tyros, sitting on his high throne, looked down at Marcus. "I offer my daughter, Princess Alara, to your people," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken emotions. "She is weak. She is unworthy of leading our kind. Perhaps in your hands, she will become something more." Alara's breath caught in her throat. He was giving her away. She turned to her father, searching his face for any sign of regret. But there was none. Only cold logic. She wasn't a daughter to him. She was a burden he needed to rid himself of. Marcus studied Alara with sharp, calculating eyes. He had seen many kinds of warriors, those who were brave, those who were strong, and those who broke under pressure. This girl, she was none of those things. She looked delicate, like a flower that would wither in a storm. "Why would we take her?" Marcus asked, crossing his arms. King Cyros's jaw tightened, because humans are the only species in the galaxy who turn weakness into strength. A tense silence filled the room. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The Zorthar were born strong, but humans made themselves strong. Marcus turned to Alara. "Do you agree to this?" Her heart pounded. She had no choice. If she refused, she would be seen as a coward, and in the Zorthar Empire, cowards were not allowed to live. Slowly, she nodded. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "Fine, but don't expect kindness. If she's weak, she won't survive." A cruel smile crossed King Cyros's lips. "Then she will either become strong, or she will die." The departure. Alara stood in front of the human warship, her hands trembling. The metal ramp leading inside felt like the mouth of a beast ready to swallow her whole. The human soldiers stood around her, watching her with unreadable expressions. She wasn't one of them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Marcus walked up beside her. "Once you step inside, there's no turning back." She looked at him, her fear threatening to consume her. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "If you stay, you will die a forgotten name. If you go, you might find something greater." With a deep breath, she stepped forward. The doors closed behind her. The weak princess was gone. Now her true journey would begin. A harsh new world. The cold metallic doors of the human warship sealed shut with a heavy hiss, cutting off the last traces of the life Princess Alara had known. No more towering halls of the Zorthar Palace, no more familiar stars glowing outside her chamber windows. She was now surrounded by the unfamiliar, a world where weakness meant death, and survival was the only measure of worth. The ship's interior was nothing like the elegance of her home. The corridors were narrow, lined with rough metal walls that echoed every footstep. The air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and something sharper, discipline. Alara's heart hammered in her chest. She had grown up isolated, protected from the harshness of her empire, but here there was no soft bed or gentle servants. No one bowed. No one showed her respect. To these humans, she wasn't a princess. She wasn't anyone at all. Captain Marcus Drake led the way, his boots striking the metal floor with confidence. His tall, broad frame seemed carved from steel itself. His face, sharp and scarred, looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. "This isn't a palace," Marcus said without looking back at her. "No one here cares about your title. You'll earn your place or you'll be forgotten. Simple as that." Alara swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't respond. What could she say? They reached a large steel door at the end of the corridor. Without a word, Marcus punched a code into the panel beside it. The door slid open, revealing a massive room filled with noise, movement, and tension thick enough to cut with a blade. The training hall. It was brutal chaos. Soldiers ran obstacle courses lined with razor-sharp wires and burning lasers. Others wrestled in the sparring pits, fists colliding with sickening force. Weights slammed to the ground. Shouts echoed through the air like war cries. The humans were relentless. Every move was raw power, every face carved with determination. "This is where you'll train," Marcus said flatly. "Your body is weak. That ends now. You'll eat what we eat, sleep where we sleep, and fight like we fight. If you can't keep up, you'll be left behind." Alara stared at the chaos before her, her stomach twisting with fear. These humans were nothing like the stories she had heard back in the Empire. They weren't monsters. They were something far worse. They were survivors. And she wasn't. Thrown to the wolves. Without warning, Marcus turned to a group of soldiers nearby. "Bring her to the pit," he ordered. Two humans approached her, one tall and muscular, the other lean but sharp-eyed like a predator. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Rough hands gripped her arms, dragging her forward. Alara stumbled as she was shoved into the center of the sparring pit. The floor beneath her feet was stained with sweat and blood. The room went silent. Every soldier turned to watch. Marcus's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Fight him," he said, nodding toward a massive soldier who stepped forward. His name was Cade, and his body was built like a machine designed for one purpose: destruction. Alara's heart clenched. She couldn't fight him. She had no training, no strength. I can't," she whispered. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You will, or you'll prove exactly why your father gave you away." That struck deep, deeper than any blade could. Her father had sent her here because she was weak, useless, forgettable. Was that how she would be remembered? The massive soldier lunged forward, fast for someone his size. Alara barely had time to react before she felt the sharp impact of his hand against her shoulder, sending her crashing to the ground. Pain shot through her body like fire. Laughter echoed around the room. "Pathetic," someone muttered from the crowd. Alara gasped for air, struggling to push herself up. Her vision blurred with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. "Get up," Marcus ordered, his voice like stone. "You think life is going to wait for you to feel ready. You're not a princess anymore. You're nothing until you prove otherwise." Her arms shook as she forced herself to her knees. The soldier came at her again. This time, she moved. Barely. His fist grazed her cheek, but she managed to roll away before the full force hit her. She didn't think. She just acted, driven by fear more than strategy. Survive. Just survive. The next strike caught her in the ribs. The pain was sharp, cutting the air from her lungs, but something inside her refused to stay down. The room wasn't laughing anymore. Marcus watched closely, his cold eyes narrowing as she staggered to her feet again. "That's it," he muttered under his breath. "Get angry." Alara didn't feel angry. She felt humiliated, small, weak. But beneath the fear, there was a tiny ember. Not rage, but something else. Determination. She wouldn't die forgotten. Not here. Not like this. The beginning of transformation. The sparring session didn't end in her victory. Alara was beaten down, left bruised and breathless on the cold floor. But something had changed. She hadn't given up. And Marcus noticed. Later, as she sat alone in the cold barracks, wrapping her bruised ribs with trembling hands, the door creaked open. Marcus stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "You're weaker than I thought," he said bluntly. Alara kept her head down. "But you didn't quit." She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. There was no kindness in his eyes, only respect. Not given freely, but earned in the smallest measure. "Training starts at dawn," he said. "Be ready. You have a long way to go if you want to survive." As he left, Alara sat in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being protected. This was her chance to become more than what everyone believed her to be. The weak daughter of the alien king was gone. Now, it was time to become something else. Something stronger. Something human. The breaking point. The cold sting of dawn arrived too early. Alara's body screamed with every small movement. Her ribs ached from the brutal fight. Her arms trembled from exhaustion, and her legs felt like dead weight. Yet, as the sharp blare of the morning alarm cut through the silence, she forced herself up. The humans did not allow weakness, and Captain Marcus Drake had made it clear there would be no mercy. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale, ghostly light through the narrow windows of the barracks. Alara's hands shook as she tied her worn boots, her breath shallow with pain. Each bruise and cut on her body told the story of yesterday's defeat. But she was still here. And survival meant getting up. The trial of endurance. Marcus was already waiting in the training yard, standing like an immovable force of nature, arms crossed and eyes cold as stone. "Move faster," his voice boomed, cutting through the early morning stillness like a blade. "You're not special here, Alara. Weakness doesn't get sympathy, it gets buried." Around her, soldiers were already running the course. They climbed towering walls, crawled under spiked wire, and carried weights heavier than anything she could imagine lifting. Sweat poured from their bodies, their muscles rippled with effort, but not one of them slowed down. "This is impossible," she thought, dread coiling in her stomach. But Marcus didn't give her a choice. "You're going into the wilderness. If you want to prove yourself, survive for 3 days out there. No food, no water provided. If you make it back, you stay. If you don't." His voice trailed off, leaving the end of that sentence to settle like ice in her veins. The wilderness beyond the human training base was infamous, a brutal wasteland where even the toughest soldiers struggled to survive. 3 days, alone. Alara's heartbeat pounded in her ears, but she refused to let fear show on her face. She nodded. "I'll do it." Marcus's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, a flicker of approval or perhaps amusement at her foolish bravery. "We'll see how long that courage lasts." Into the wild. The barren land stretched out before her like a cruel, endless void. Jagged rocks, harsh winds, and biting cold awaited every step. The sky above was gray and heavy, casting long shadows across the desolate ground. The survival pack they gave her contained only the bare essentials: a small knife, a canteen with barely enough water for a day, and a thin blanket. 3 days, alone. The first day was manageable. The lessons Marcus had drilled into her echoed in her head. Stay low. Conserve your energy. Move during cooler hours. She found shelter beneath a rocky outcrop as the sun beat down mercilessly. Her mind replayed every painful training moment, the bruises, the humiliation, the constant voice telling her she would never be enough. But she pushed forward. The second day was worse. Her water was gone by morning, and every breath burned her throat. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a beast with no end. She stumbled more often than she walked, every muscle in her body screaming for her to stop. And that's when she heard it. A low growl cut through the silence. Alara froze. Turning slowly, she spotted the creature, a monstrous, wolf-like beast native to this cruel land. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and sharp teeth bared in a snarl. No weapons, just a knife. Her body screamed at her to run, but she remembered Marcus's voice. Never turn your back on fear. Stand your ground. The creature lunged. Alara rolled to the side, her hand gripping the knife tightly. She slashed wildly, catching the beast across its side. It roared in pain but didn't retreat. The fight was pure survival. Every move she made was driven by instinct, ducking, slashing, dodging. But she wasn't strong. Every hit left her weaker, and exhaustion weighed her down like chains. In the chaos, she made one final desperate move, driving the blade deep into the creature's throat. The beast let out a final, chilling cry before collapsing at her feet. Alara fell to her knees beside the body, her own breath ragged and shallow. She had survived. The third day, breaking point. By the third day, Alara was beyond exhaustion. Her body was battered, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse. She could feel the fever creeping into her veins from the wound on her arm, a deep cut from the creature's claws. She stumbled forward, vision blurring. Every step felt like moving through thick mud. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. The voice of doubt was louder than ever. But then, another voice echoed through her mind. Not Marcus's voice, her own. Get up. She remembered her father's cold eyes, the way he had looked at her like a failed legacy. She remembered the laughter of the soldiers, the mocking words. Pathetic. Weak. No, not anymore. Alara forced herself to stand, using the last shreds of her strength. Her legs felt like they might break beneath her weight, but she kept moving. Each step was a victory against the weakness that had haunted her all her life. The human camp appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to rise. The return. The soldiers gathered at the edge of the camp as Alara stumbled through the entrance, barely able to stand. Blood dried on her face. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised and battered. She looked nothing like the fragile princess who had arrived days earlier. But she had survived. Marcus stepped forward, arms crossed, studying her in silence. His expression was unreadable. I didn't think you'd make it, he admitted. Alara looked up at him, her voice hoarse but steady. Neither did I. For the first time, Marcus nodded, not with pity, not with mockery, but with a flicker of respect. You didn't break, he said. That's something. Alara didn't feel victorious. Every inch of her body screamed in pain. But something deep inside had shifted, something stronger than pride or survival. She hadn't just endured. She had fought back. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel weak anymore. Awakening the warrior. The pain didn't fade. It became a constant presence, an unwelcome but familiar companion that followed Alara with every breath, every movement, every heartbeat. Yet something was different now. She had survived the wilderness, bruised, battered, and broken, but not defeated. When she returned to the human camp, the whispers had started. Soldiers who had once laughed at her now watched in silence. Their eyes no longer held the sharp glint of mockery. Instead, there was something new, respect, or maybe something deeper, fear. Even Captain Marcus Drake looked at her differently now. You're still alive, he said flatly, as if her survival was more inconvenient than impressive. I didn't think you had it in you. Alara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Surviving the wilderness wasn't victory. It was just the beginning. The training intensifies. The next phase of her journey wasn't easier. It was worse. Marcus didn't go easy on her. If anything, he pushed her harder than ever before. Every morning began before dawn with brutal physical training, running until her legs gave out, lifting weights until her arms screamed, sparring against stronger, faster opponents who showed no mercy. But this time, she didn't fall behind. Alara wasn't the same fragile girl who had arrived weak and scared. Day by day, her body grew stronger, her muscles adapted, and her endurance deepened. Each blow she took taught her something new about her limits, how to move, how to strike, how to survive. One morning, Marcus watched her spar against Jax, one of the strongest soldiers in the camp. The match wasn't fair. Jax was faster, more experienced, and brutally efficient. But Alara didn't back down. Jax came at her with a heavy swing, and instead of dodging, she ducked low and drove her fist into his ribs. The sound of the impact echoed through the training hall, and for the first time, Jax stumbled back. The room fell silent. Marcus didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Approval, perhaps. Again, he ordered, and Alara fought again, and again, and again, until sweat poured from her body and every muscle burned like fire. But she didn't quit. The hidden power within. It was during one of these brutal training sessions that it happened. Late into the night, while everyone else slept, Alara sat alone in the training yard. Her body was raw from exhaustion, but her mind was restless. The stars above seemed colder than usual, distant and indifferent to her struggles. That's when the voices began. Soft at first, barely whispers. "You are more than they think you are." She jolted upright, scanning the dark yard. Who's there? Silence. But deep inside, something stirred. A strange, cold energy crawled through her veins, pulsing like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. Her breathing quickened. Her heart raced. "You are not weak. You are not broken. You are Zorthar." And more. Alara pressed her hands against the ground, trying to steady herself, but the energy surged stronger. Suddenly, the rocks around her trembled, rising slightly before falling back into place. What was that? The realization hit her like a thunderclap. This wasn't human strength. This was something else. Something ancient. Her father had always told her she was weak. But what if it wasn't weakness? What if it was something he feared? Marcus's test. The next morning, Alara didn't speak of the strange power. She buried the fear and confusion deep inside, focusing instead on her training. But Marcus wasn't fooled. "You're holding back," he said during sparring practice, eyes narrowing. "I'm not," Alara lied. "Yes, you are." His voice was low and dangerous. "You're hiding something, and that'll get you killed." He lunged at her suddenly, fast, brutal, and unexpected. Alara barely managed to block his attack, her arms screaming from the impact. She stumbled back, but Marcus didn't stop. "Fight back." Another hit. She fell to the ground, breathless and shaking. "Fight back." His voice echoed in her mind, mixing with the strange whispers from the night before. The cold energy stirred again, crawling beneath her skin like a sleeping beast awakened. No, not now. Not here. But Marcus wasn't giving her a choice. "Get up, Alara," he barked. "You survived the wilderness. You killed a beast with nothing but a knife. You have more inside you. I know it." Something inside her snapped. The energy surge, wild and uncontrollable. Her hands clenched into fists as the ground beneath her shook ever so slightly. She launched forward, faster than she thought possible. Her fist connected with Marcus's chest, sending him stumbling backward for the first time ever. The entire room went silent. Marcus steadied himself, a slow, grim smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "There it is," he muttered. "That's what I've been waiting for." Alara stood there, breathless, terrified of what she had just done. What was that power? The secret revealed. That night, Marcus called her into his office, a small, dimly lit room filled with maps and battle plans. "You're not just Zorthar," he said, studying her with cold intensity. "There's something else inside you, something ancient." Alara sat across from him, silent, her hands trembling in her lap. Marcus leaned forward. "Your father didn't send you here because you were weak. He sent you here because he was afraid of what you might become. Alara's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" "There's a threat coming," Marcus said grimly. "Something ancient and powerful. The Devourer. It destroys entire civilizations, wipes out planets like they never existed." Alara stared at him, her heart pounding. "And you might be the only one who can stop it." The warrior's awakening begins. For the first time, Alara realized her journey wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about proving she wasn't weak. It was about becoming something greater. Something powerful enough to face the darkness that was coming. But the power inside her was dangerous, wild, and unpredictable. If she didn't learn to control it, it could destroy her and everyone around her. And so, her true training began. Not just to become stronger, not just to become a warrior, but to become the savior the galaxy didn't know it needed. The human secret. The room was thick with silence after Marcus's final words. "You might be the only one who can stop it." The weight of those words pressed down on Alara like a mountain. The Devourer, a name that carried fear even in Marcus's voice. She had survived the wilderness, faced humiliation, pain, and exhaustion. But now she realized all of that had just been preparation for something far worse. And worse still, she didn't understand the power inside her. The strange energy, the whispers, the tremors in the ground. What were they? Why had her father sent her away just as this force was awakening within her? Marcus didn't wait for her questions. He stood abruptly, grabbing a data chip from a hidden compartment in his desk. His face, usually carved from stone, now carried something unfamiliar: fear. "Sit down," he ordered, and Alara obeyed without question. He placed the chip into a projector. A hologram flickered to life, showing a star map of the galaxy. Several systems were marked in red, systems she recognized from her lessons back in the Zorthar Palace. Except now, they were gone. Entire sectors had been swallowed whole, reduced to dead zones where no signals, no light, no life remained. "This is what we're up against," Marcus said grimly. "The Devourer doesn't leave survivors. It doesn't conquer. It erases. Planets, species, civilizations. Gone. Like they never existed." Alara swallowed hard, unable to tear her eyes from the empty voids in the hologram. "And we think your power, whatever it is, might be the only thing that can stop it," Marcus added. "A hidden history." Alara's voice was barely a whisper. "Why me? I'm not a warrior. I'm barely surviving here." Marcus shook his head. "You're not just Zorthar anymore, Alara. You've survived things your people never could. You've trained under conditions that would break the strongest soldier. But this," he pointed to her chest, "this power in you, it's ancient. It's not just in your blood. It's connected to humanity's past too." Alara blinked, confused. Connected to humanity? How? Marcus leaned back, his eyes dark and distant as if recalling a memory older than himself. "There's a legend, forgotten by most of the galaxy, but not by us," he began. "Thousands of years ago, before humanity even discovered space travel, there was a prophecy. It spoke of a bond between humans and an ancient cosmic force, a force powerful enough to destroy galaxies or protect them. A force sealed away, hidden, until the day it found a worthy vessel." Alara felt her stomach twist. "And you think I'm that vessel?" "We don't think. We know." Marcus turned off the hologram, leaving them in silence once again, unlocking the power within. The next phase of Alara's training wasn't about brute strength or endurance anymore. It was about control. Her power was like a raging storm, wild and unpredictable. Every time she tapped into it, she felt the fear of losing herself completely. Her first lesson was about focus. They took her deep underground, into a chamber carved out of stone and metal, designed to withstand the destructive force of advanced weaponry. Marcus stood before her, arms crossed. "I want you to move that boulder," he commanded, nodding toward a massive stone slab twice her size. Alara stared at it, her heart sinking. That's impossible. Nothing is impossible, Marcus said sharply. You survived 3 days in the wilderness with nothing but a knife. You faced death and didn't break. This isn't about strength, it's about will. Alara closed her eyes and reached deep inside. She tried to summon the strange energy she had felt before, during the fight with Marcus, during those moments of desperation in the wild. But nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. Her frustration boiled over. I can't do this, she shouted, turning away. Marcus's voice was like steel. You think the Devourer cares about your doubts. You think it'll wait for you to feel ready. It'll destroy everything unless you take control of what's inside you. Alara clenched her fists, anger mixing with fear. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled. A pulse of cold energy rushed through her body. Her eyes snapped open, and the boulder shifted. Marcus didn't react. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. You're just getting started, he said. The shadows of the past. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. The power inside her was terrifying. Every time she used it, it felt like touching something ancient and dangerous. And then, the dreams began. In the silence of the night, shadows danced through her mind, visions of battles fought thousands of years ago. She saw strange symbols carved into the walls of ancient ruins, heard voices whispering in languages she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. She had been chosen. Not by accident, not by fate, but by something older than her father's empire, something woven into the very fabric of the galaxy. When she awoke, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The threat draws closer. The next morning, the alarms echoed through the base like a sudden storm. Marcus burst into the barracks with a grim expression. They're here, he said. Alara sat up, heart pounding. Who? The first wave of the Devourer's forces. Without hesitation, she followed Marcus to the command room. The holographic display showed a fleet approaching. A swarm of dark, shifting ships that didn't look like anything built by human or Zorthar hands. They're not just coming for Earth, Marcus said. They're coming for you. Alara's throat tightened. Why me? Because whatever's inside you, it's the only thing that scares them. The first strike. The skies above Earth darkened as the Devourer's forces descended. The humans launched their defense, a fleet of warships firing energy blasts into the void. But the enemy ships moved like shadows, dodging and weaving through the chaos. Alara stood on the battlefield for the first time, surrounded by human soldiers ready to fight and die to protect their home. Marcus handed her a weapon, but she shook her head. I don't need it, she said, her voice steady. The ground beneath her began to hum with power as she summoned the energy inside her. The air crackled, and her eyes glowed faintly, a beacon of the ancient force awakening within her. The soldiers around her paused, watching in awe as she stepped forward, the enemy ships looming overhead. Alara wasn't the weak princess anymore. She was something new, and she was ready for war. The battle begins. The sky above Earth had never looked so dark. Where once there had been stars shining like scattered diamonds, now there was only a monstrous shadow stretching across the heavens. The Devourer's fleet had arrived, a black wave of death swallowing everything in its path. Their ships weren't made of metal, but something darker, something alive. They twisted through the void like hungry beasts, ready to consume not just Earth, but everything. For centuries, humanity had prepared for war, training, building, inventing weapons capable of leveling entire cities. But when the enemy wasn't just flesh and blood, when the battle was against an ancient cosmic force bent on erasing reality itself, steel and fire wouldn't be enough. The first strike. Alara stood on the front lines, surrounded by the very people who had once seen her as weak and useless. Now they stood behind her, waiting for her to lead them into the fight of their lives. Her breath came slowly, steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of her mind. The power inside her, wild, ancient, and unpredictable, was ready. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Captain Marcus Drake approached, dressed in full battle armor, his jaw set in grim determination. "They'll be coming through the outer defenses soon. We need to hit them hard before they'd reach the atmosphere," he said. His eyes met hers. No pity, no doubt, only respect. "You ready?" Alara didn't answer with words. She just nodded, her hands curling into fists as that strange cold energy surged through her veins. The alarms blared. The ground shook beneath their feet as the first wave of the Devourer's ships descended from the sky. "Defensive unities, hold DDA line," Marcus roared. The battle began like a storm. The skies lit up as Earth's defensive cannons fired at the incoming fleet. Explosions bloomed in the upper atmosphere, but the Devourer's ships were fast, too fast. Their hulls absorbed the energy blasts like water soaking into sand, adapting with terrifying efficiency. Alara could feel the fear in the soldiers around her. This wasn't just another war. This was annihilation. The power within unleashed. As enemy ships broke through the sky, dark figures descended with them, creatures made of shadow and bone, their eyes glowing with hunger. The front lines collapsed as human soldiers struggled to fight back, their weapons barely slowing the creatures down. Alara stepped forward, her heartbeat steady and strong. "You're not weak." The voice in her mind wasn't her father's. It wasn't Marcus. It was her own. "You're stronger than anyone ever believed." The energy inside her surged, hot and cold all at once. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and suddenly, she was moving, faster than she had ever moved before. She launched herself into the heart of the battlefield. One of the shadow creatures lunged at her, but before it could touch her, she reached out, and the force inside her exploded. A blast of raw energy shot from her hands, slamming into the creature with devastating power. The shadow dissolved instantly, vanishing into the air like dust. The battlefield froze. Every soldier, human and alien alike, watched in stunned silence as Alara stood amidst the chaos, her eyes glowing bright like twin stars. Marcus's voice echoed through the comms. "That's it, Alara. You're their nightmare now. Show them why they should be afraid." The turning point. The Devourer's forces began to focus on her, sensing the threat she posed. The creatures swarmed her position, dozens at first, then hundreds, all rushing toward her like a tidal wave of death. But this time, she didn't run. She fought. Every movement was instinctive. She raised her hands, sending shockwaves of pure energy through the ground, tearing the creatures apart. Her power wasn't just destruction. It was creation too. Each burst of energy formed barriers of shimmering light that shielded the soldiers behind her. The humans rallied, pushing forward with newfound courage. "Move with her," Marcus commanded. "She's our shield. Use her power and drive them back." The battlefield became a dance of fury and light. Alara's power surged through every breath, every heartbeat, every strike. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every life on Earth. But deep inside, something darker stirred. With every burst of power, she felt a presence lurking in the shadows of her mind. The Devourer itself. It wasn't just sending ships. It was watching her. The father's betrayal. In the chaos of battle, another memory struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her father's voice, not cold and dismissive this time, but panicked and fearful. "You must go to the humans. They'll know what to do. You're not safe here." Why? Why had he sent her away truly? The pieces began to fall into place. The whispers in her mind, the strange power coursing through her veins. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't random. The truth was darker than she had ever imagined. He knew. King Xyros had known about the power inside her. He hadn't sent her away because she was weak. He had sent her away because she was dangerous. But now, with every ounce of strength awakened, Alara realized the terrifying truth. The Devourer wasn't just coming for Earth. It was coming for her. The cost of power. The battle raged on, But Alara knew that brute force wouldn't stop the devourer. It wasn't just a physical threat. It was something deeper, something cosmic. Each time she used her power, the connection between them grew stronger. She could feel the devourer's thoughts creeping into her mind, cold and merciless. "You are mine." But she wasn't ready to surrender. Alara pushed forward, leading the charge with Marcus at her side. Together, they drove the devourer's forces back, reclaiming ground inch by bloody inch. But the more she fought, the more she understood the terrifying truth. Every victory brought her closer to her breaking point. And when that moment came, she would have to make an impossible choice. Would she sacrifice everything to stop the devourer? Or would she become the very thing her father had feared all along? The calm before the final battle. As the battlefield grew quiet, the last of the devourer's forces retreated into the void. But Alara knew the war wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The true fight was coming. And when it did, she would face not just the devourer, but the darkness growing inside herself. The fate of humanity, and the entire galaxy, would depend on what she chose to become. Rise of the Warrior Queen. The battlefield was eerily quiet. The ground, once shaking with the force of the war's chaos, now lay still, scared by fire and blood. The air was thick with the scent of ash and loss. The devourer's forces had retreated, for now, but every soldier on the field knew the battle was far from over. And at the heart of it all stood Alara. Her body was battered, her armor scorched and cracked, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. That strange, ancient energy pulsed beneath her skin, alive, wild, and terrifying. Yet, for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She understood now. This power wasn't a curse, it wasn't weakness. It was a gift, one forged by sacrifice, pain, and survival. But as she stood over the battlefield, a chill crept down her spine. She could feel it, like a shadow brushing against her mind. The devourer was coming. Not an army this time. Not ships. Itself. The truth revealed. That night, in the quiet of the command bunker, Alara faced Marcus for what felt like the last time. His face, usually carved from stone, was softer now, though weariness weighed heavily on him. "You fought well," he said, voice low and rough. Alara shook her head. "It's not over. We both know that." Marcus hesitated before handing her a small, cracked device, a Zorthar memory crystal. "I found this in the wreckage of one of your Empire's ships," he said. "It's from your father." Alara took it with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the smooth surface, the crystal flickered to life, projecting a ghostly image of King Zyros. His face was worn with fear, something she had never seen before. "Alara, if you're seeing this, it means I failed. I didn't send you to the humans because you were weak. I sent you because you were our last hope. You carry within you an ancient force, a power older than the stars themselves. Our ancestors once wielded it to protect the galaxy, but that power, it was never meant to be awoken." Alara's breath caught in her throat. The devourer doesn't just destroy, it consumes power. And you, my daughter, are what it seeks most. That's why I sent you away, not to abandon you, but to protect you. You must learn to control it before it controls you. You must stop it, because if you fall... The message cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. The final stand. Alara stood on the edge of the human command center, staring out at the horizon. The sky was dark again, but not with night. A massive, terrifying force loomed above the planet's surface, bigger than any ship she had ever seen. It wasn't made of metal or flesh. It was made of emptiness, a living void, shifting and twisting in the sky. The devourer had arrived. It spoke not with words, but with presence, an overwhelming sense of hunger that clawed into her mind. "You are mine." But Alara was done running. She turned to Marcus. "This is it. I have to face it." Marcus gripped her shoulder, his jaw tight with emotion. "You're not alone." "No," she said, shaking her head. "This is my fight. The battle within." As she approached the heart of the battlefield, the Devourer's presence pressed down on her like a crushing weight. Every step felt like wading through endless darkness. And then she was inside it. Not physically, but mentally, spiritually. The battlefield faded around her, replaced by an endless void of shadows and whispers. "You think you're powerful," the voice echoed inside her mind. "But you are nothing. Just a frightened child holding a spark you cannot control." Alara's breath steadied. "Maybe I am afraid, but fear isn't weakness. It's survival." The power inside her surged, an explosion of light cutting through the void. Memories flooded her mind, Marcus pushing her to be stronger, the wilderness testing her spirit, her father's cold betrayal turned desperate love. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every life the Devourer sought to erase. And she wasn't going to lose. Becoming the warrior queen. The energy inside her flared to life, stronger than ever before. It wasn't chaotic now. It was controlled, refined by pain, shaped by sacrifice. Alara reached deep within herself and found the ancient force her father had feared. Not destruction, but creation. The power to protect, to shield, to fight back against the void. With every ounce of strength she had left, she released it. A pulse of pure light exploded from her chest, ripping through the darkness. The Devourer's screams echoed through the void, not in anger, but in fear. The shadows shattered around her like glass. Alara stood tall, her body glowing like a star reborn. She wasn't weak. She was a warrior, a queen, a protector of the galaxy, the ultimate sacrifice. But she knew the truth. This power wasn't meant to last. The force inside her wasn't just a weapon. It was a beacon that could either save the galaxy or destroy her. There was only one way to stop the Devourer for good. She had to become the light that would erase the darkness. Alara turned to Marcus one last time, her voice steady. "Tell them I fought for them. Tell them I chose to be more than what I was born to be." Before Marcus could stop her, she released every ounce of her power in one final devastating blast. A wave of pure energy surged across the battlefield, swallowing the Devourer whole, erasing it from existence. The sky cleared. The void was gone. And with it, so was Alara, the legacy of a hero. In the days that followed, Earth mourned. But her sacrifice wasn't in vain. She had saved not just humanity, but every life in the galaxy. A statue was raised in her honor, not as a princess of the Zorthar Empire, but as something greater. Alara, the warrior queen, the light that defeated the darkness. And though her body was gone, the power she had awakened lived on, in the hearts of those who fought beside her, and in the endless sky that she had saved. Her legacy was more than survival. It was hope. The galaxy would never forget her name. Alara, the queen who conquered the Devourer,